Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
Tonight, the clock stops for the special budget sessions, calls to reduce the state's deficit. Anthem Blue Cross rate hikes in California fueled the national debate over health care reform. A report on the future of the NUMMI plant in Fremont. And a green technology blooms in Silicon Valley. Also, the challenge facing California community colleges in a conversation with Chancellor Jack Scott. An artistic tribute to the Fillmore district in San Francisco and the fight over the future of one of the area's historic buildings. And Leslie Sabanco on food and wine this week with the traditions in the celebration of Chinese New Year. Coming up next. Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel from Sacramento, John Myers, Sacramento Bureau Chief, KQED Public Radio, on the state budget. And Tom Abate, staff writer with the San Francisco Chronicle on the NUMMI plant closure. And Victoria Colliver, staff writer, also with the Chronicle, with the latest on Anthem rate hikes. And Rebecca Smith, staff reporter with the Wall Street Journal on the new Bloom Energy Box. Well, John Myers, this is the second time in just a few months that the legislature's had to tackle a big budget deficit. What do they do?
Well, it feels like it's more than even the second time. I mean, when you could look at all the times we went over the last 18 months, this was the special session that the governor declared a fiscal emergency back in January. They had 45 days to act. And you've got to love the vagueness of the constitutional amendment that said they had to act. They did act. They just didn't act on the entire $20 billion problem. When all was said and done, they pushed forward a plan that's somewhere between $3 and $4 billion. And I say it's between because the Assembly and the Senate didn't pass the exact same package and they're still working through it. I don't think the governor is displeased that at the size of the package that they move forward because, frankly, everybody knows there's a lot of work to do. These were the easier of the solutions that people are talking about for 2010, and these weren't necessarily easy. You were talking about more cuts to the developmentally disabled programs. You were talking about more cuts in prisons, possibly, if they can get those savings. But they got a lot of work ahead of them, and there really aren't any easy choices. We've been saying that for a long time, and certainly true again, a lot to do.
John, one of the things you mentioned, prisons and prison health care, I know was on the block, and yet there's this court order out there saying they got to do more, but they're talking about cutting. Is that all the same money we're talking about?
Yeah, it is. The governor had called for about an $800 million reduction in the prison health care receiver's budget. That's the court-appointed receiver who's dealing with prison health care. And the legislature just moved that forward. Of course, you know, they're not going to quibble when you think you've got $800 million and it's hard to find anything that big anywhere else in the budget. The prison receiver, Clark Kelso, actually was speaking to reporters on a conference call today and said he thinks he can do that, but it's going to take time. And, you know, the real key part of that prison problem, as we know, is that the state doesn't really control what's going on. You've got the federal courts actively involved in what's happening, especially in healthcare in the prisons, and we're paying for it as taxpayers. And that is a friction point that has been going for a while. But there really aren't any easy solutions, as I said before, in this budget problem. A lot of what they're doing is stuff that is probably going to be challenged in court. Speaking of the courts, one of them is this controversial and mind-numbing, I'm not going to try to explain it here, Belva, but this mind-numbing gas tax swap, where they would move taxes around that you pay on every gallon of gas. You wouldn't feel it at the pump. As a matter of fact, they're actually saying the price might go down 5 cents a gallon in the next year. But it moves money out of one pot of the state budget into another. And it's all done because you theoretically can do it without a 2/3 vote, which means you don't need Republicans who don't want to vote for a tax increase. They don't call this one a tax increase. And I think that's a great example of the complexity around the fundamental choices that we can never seem to do here in Sacramento between more spending cuts and revenues.
Is there any chance, John, that the attitudes on taxation would change and that we've come to a point where we just simply can't cut anymore?
It doesn't seem so far that would change. I think one of the things you are going to hear a lot about this year, you're going to hear it here at the state capitol, and there's a chance you're going to hear it at the ballot box come November, is this discussion of tax credits. You know, those cost money too. They are reductions in state revenues. And there were a good chunk of tax credits in the budget deal last year for big business, for corporations, to the tune of more than $1 billion. Democrats have talked about rolling those back. The governor is opposed to rolling some of them back, and frankly, Republicans are too. But at the same time, I mentioned the ballot. The California Teachers Association is putting money behind a ballot measure that would roll those tax breaks back at the ballot if it doesn't happen here at the state capitol. So I think tax breaks you're going to hear a lot about. General tax increases, hard to see that happening, especially given the climate we're in, the economy we're in, and let's face it, it is an election year. A lot of members of the legislature up for re-election.
John, the cities have claimed that they've gotten the short end in the past. Has there been any effort that looks at all successful to try to protect the cities from further cuts?
Well, you know, last year, of course, was the high water mark or low water mark, depending on how you define it, for local government, with the borrowing of local revenues to help balance that problem that has to be paid back. The cities in particular, speaking of the ballot, are pushing a ballot measure that would make it impossible to borrow again. I mean, it was already tough to borrow money from local governments after a ballot measure from 2004. The new ballot measure would make it absolutely impossible to do that again. Whether they get extra relief, I think that's really hard to see at this point. I mean, everybody seems to be really hurting at this point, trying to figure out exactly how they're going to do with less. You know, we solved somewhere on the order of $65 billion in budget red ink in 2009, and now you're talking about $20 billion in 2010. I think everyone here, and this is one of the reasons that more wasn't done this week, everyone here really wants to see what the state's tax revenues are going to be like in April before they make a lot of final, possibly hard decisions. There are some people who actually think we might get an April surprise of tax revenues. As a matter of fact, the state controller last week said that January was about $1 billion ahead of where they thought it was going to be, ahead of projections. A lot of people are hoping maybe the economy is slowly inching its way back. I think some economists might not agree on that so far, but everyone wants to see really what the state has in the bank before it makes the really, really hard decisions this summer.
John, there was also a leadership change up there in terms of the legislature. The speaker, Karen Bass, handed over the chair to someone else. Is that going to change the negotiations with the governor or have any effect whatsoever?
Well, that formal change is actually happening on Monday. You're right. John Perez, a Democrat from Los Angeles, becomes the next Speaker of the Assembly, with Karen Bass being termed out due to term limits. Perez is a freshman. That's always a very interesting dynamic when a freshman is leading the entire lower house. He hasn't rolled his sleeves up completely in the negotiating of the budget with the governor yet, but Perez was calling the shots on the floor about a lot of these budget votes that we had this week in the special session and trying to get things forward. But I'll tell you, you know, this is a really fractious legislature. We've talked about this, I think, in the past. Republicans in particular were fractious for a while. They couldn't agree on anything. Democrats really are the fractious group now, especially in the Assembly, where a lot of Assembly Democrats are very angry. They think they have given more than their share on a lot of issues they cared about, while they haven't gotten revenue increases or things like that. And I think John Perez has got his work cut out for him to lead what I think is a very unhappy group of Democrats.
Well, the governor still can play a key role here at this transition time. Does he seem to have the appetite for it, or what is his mood?
Yeah, you know, I don't know, Belva. It's a great question. I mean, these are the final months of the Arnold Schwarzenegger era here in Sacramento, and lame ducks typically have a difficult time in any legislative entity, whether it's here in Sacramento or here in Washington. The governor is focusing on part of this that he thinks is the solution, which is jobs and trying to stimulate the economy, create jobs. Now, there are 3 different job discussions going on at the Capitol, as you might imagine. The governor has a plan that he talks about, some tax credits and some things like that. Democrats have a jobs plan that they're talking about that is largely using unspent bond money to kind of fund some of these projects around the state, construction projects, for example. And Republicans are talking about their own package that they've kind of not quite rolled out yet in the legislature. But the governor is focused on, as he says, jobs, jobs, jobs. I think that's where he really sees that he thinks he can make an impact this year. But yeah, does he roll up his sleeves and want to start getting into a lot of systemic changes that are not going to even take effect until after he leaves office? Great question. We don't know the answer yet.
Well, John, Sacramento seems to be a mirror image of Washington, D.C., and we're going to turn to healthcare, where there were some similarities. Victoria Colliver, Anthem Blue Cross executives were on the carpet, both in Sacramento, there where John was, as well as in Washington, with some hard questions to answer. Did we learn anything?
Well, Anthem had a really busy week. I mean, it started with the insurance commissioner coming out and hitting them with over 700 violations for billing practices. And then we go to Sacramento and we have Anthem Blue Cross executives on the hot seat. And the next day we look at, back in Washington, we have the head of WellPoint also on the hot seat. And yesterday, of course, the Health Summit where these increases were referenced.
Now, WellPoint, Anthem, Blue Cross, all one company.
WellPoint owns Anthem Blue Cross, and Anthem Blue Cross is the entity here in California which raised the rates so much on consumers and sparked this debate that President Obama was able to take and then use to help reignite this health, the discussion over health legislation. So did we learn anything? It was a lot of talk and it was a lot of asking questions. And even yesterday, there was another, the Attorney General here in the state asked for more. They're looking into seeing if there's any violations. So it was more a week of questions than answers. And I think that WellPoint, their answers have been somewhat unsatisfying for a lot of the lawmakers probing into this.
Victoria, could I ask a question? I don't know if I could jump in really quickly, but I covered the hearing that was here in Sacramento where Anthem Blue Cross's president was on the hot seat in front of the Assembly Health Committee. And I'm wondering what you have found on this. There was a discussion about, since we're talking about the individual market, which is different than people who get their insurance through their employer, the Anthem executives were saying that they thought the rate increase could result in about 250,000 of their current customers going elsewhere, leaving the health plan that they're on now. And it was hard to figure out whether a lot of those people would go to other providers or would become part of the ranks of the uninsured. And I would imagine that's one of the real, that's a touchstone issue, which seemed like both policy-wise and politically.
Well, they tried to explain that of that 250,000 who would leave, that part of the market is transitional in nature. And some people will get a job, they may be covered through the spouse, some people may go into another type of insurance product, some people may become uninsured, and they really didn't have the answers for that. I think it was a big number, so it's pretty frightening. The real problem with the individual market is that people who are in it and have any sort of pre-existing condition, once they're in it, they're pretty trapped in that market because they can't go out and shop around for someone else to take them because no one else will want them. It's a real problem.
So one of the things that I think people are surprised at is how very limited the state's powers are to do anything in this instance. And we're seeing Jerry Brown and some others, I think, trying to find areas in which they might gain traction. Do you think they're going to have any success at that?
The issue is that the state doesn't have a whole lot of regulatory power. That just is a fact. They can look at and see whether or not Anthem is spending less than 70% of their premium dollars on medical care. That might be a violation, something they can use. Jerry Brown's looking into a lot of things. He's looking into claims practices in terms of are they paying enough claims? Is there any other things that he can look at to see if there are violations, ways that they could work on these companies. Mm-hmm. But the truth is they just don't have a whole lot of power over the issue of premiums.
What are these 700 violations or infractions that the insurance commissioner
They're
found?
billing practices, and they're basically that they didn't pay on time. I think the Department of Insurance is pretty upset that they're saying that Anthem, we asked you questions and you didn't respond to us in a timely manner. Anthem's answer is that they weren't aware that this was going on. I haven't heard a whole lot from Anthem on that.
How much do you think that this apparent inability of the government to do anything moves the dial toward, gee, we have to do something about healthcare, even if there isn't perhaps a common ground? Do you think that this really reinvigorates the need or dramatizes the need for something differently to be done than to trust the market?
It certainly was something that the president could grab onto and say, hey, look at the people in California. They are being asked to pay up to 39% more. It's pretty shocking. So it does rein in the cost, and it makes it very personal. And as we saw, many people were listening to the Obama Health Summit. I think that there was a lot of talk going on. There was a lot of discussion. And I think in some ways it just showed the divisiveness of
But does it change any minds or create a common ground?
I am unclear about that. I think that most people can agree that a 39% rate increase is really high. What to do about it, how to rein in insurers, how to solve these problems, I don't think that's changed a whole lot.
So if this were some other product and a company raises its prices 39%, one would expect competitors to jump in and say, you don't have to take that from them, come to us. I haven't seen any kind of marketing or anything. Is it simply a hopeless industry?
It's just a very different industry than your standard product. And a lot of people argue it's not that competitive, even though there are a number of companies. There's just a very handful, like 5 to 7 companies that dominate the entire market share. Some of them don't want this individual coverage. Some of them specialize in larger groups. There really isn't a lot of places for consumers to go. There aren't many places for them to shop around.
And here we have a time when people are becoming unemployed and self-employed because of the economy.
Exactly. Well,
and they're being forced into this part of the world.
There's been talk about buying across state lines because of that.
And if we really look deeply, the concern of those workers that are going to be leaving the NUMMI plant has to do more with healthcare and how do they keep it. You know, in just about a month, the NUMMI auto plant in Fremont is scheduled to close its doors. The plant's owner, Toyota, made that decision long before its recent problems with recalls. Spencer Michaels, correspondent with the PBS NewsHour, reports on the impact of the closure on the workers and the community.
At the same time Toyota is dealing with a huge recall, it is about to shutter a major auto plant. In just a few weeks, all this activity will grind to a halt. 4,700 jobs will disappear, and so will California's only auto assembly plant. And a unique joint operating agreement between General Motors and Toyota will officially be dead. The two automakers have been building cars at the new United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated plant, or NUMMI, since 1984. But last year, General Motors went into bankruptcy and decided to pull out of the deal. Then Toyota announced it would halt production here on March 31st, a date that Toyota says remains unaltered by the brake and accelerator problems some of its cars are having. Walter Odisho, manufacturing manager, has been with NUMMI 21 years.
We are the victim of the times and the economy and the downturn that was experienced.
NUMMI spokesman Lance Tomasu says without GM, the plant was no longer viable.
Unfortunately, when General Motors pulled out of the joint venture, that's what precipitated the closure of the plant.
So you don't think that one company like Toyota could run this plant all by itself?
Well, again, when the joint venture was formed in '84, it wasn't built to survive without one of its partners.
Even though this plant closes soon, Toyota and NUMMI are making use of every day, running 2 shifts a day, 5 days a week, and cranking out Corollas and Tacomas, one every 54 seconds.
A few changes were made in the Corolla manufacturing process following the recall, but the line never shut down. The plant is huge. Since it opened, about 8 million new cars and trucks have rolled onto American highways. Novas, Pontiac Vibes, Geo and Chevy Prisms, Corollas, and Tacoma pickup trucks. Toyota says a key factor in closing the plant was efficiency, especially in a depressed market. Irv Miller is vice president for corporate communications.
The Fremont plant is the oldest plant that is operating in our system. We have new plants in San Antonio that's building our pickup trucks. The move to take Tacoma from NUMMI to San Antonio is a common sense move.
The idea of the joint operation 25 years ago was that GM would learn Japanese production methods from Toyota, and Toyota would learn how to operate in an American environment. UC Berkeley Business School professor Robert Cole, who studies the auto industry, says the collaboration was mostly successful, especially for Toyota, which back in 1984 had several goals.
To figure out how to manage U.S. workers, perhaps deal with unions. Also, they wanted to figure out how to replicate their just-in-time delivery system that they had in Japan. And both of those objectives were accomplished.
For GM, Cole says the venture was less successful.
For at least 10 years, they showed very little interest in serious learning from that plant. So a lot of the GM managers that were sent there were put back into low-level positions where they had no influence because people didn't want to hear that Japan is doing things better.
And for the auto companies, the cost of getting supplies to NUMMI, sitting all alone on the West Coast, was becoming a burden, since most supplies come from the Midwest or elsewhere.
For example, all of the engines that go into the Tacomas and the Corollas that are produced in NUMMI right now come from West Virginia. So we have to, in fact, ship engines across country to California and then ship them back in ready-made products throughout the balance of the United States.
Wages for the workers here average $28 an hour, and the work has been steady for people like Jose Enciso and Shay Church.
I was shocked. I mean, I was expecting to retire from this place, so it blew my mind away. The deadline's been set, and that's what I'm going by, and I'm hoping for the best and planning for the worst.
I'm a single mom, so it's pretty scary, and seems like there's, lots of other people out there looking for jobs as well.
Which is why some employees, like Marcela Alvarez, are trying to keep the plant open.
I have 3 kids, it's kind of hard, maybe lose my home, not being able to, pay the bills and the mortgage.
Alvarez and fellow members of the United Auto Workers are gathering signatures around the country and threatening a boycott of Toyota, even in the face of Toyota's troubles, hoping to persuade the company to keep production going in Fremont. Some local union members disagree strongly with their own leadership. As this amateur video shows, recent union meetings have erupted in chaos, with dissidents arguing that increased benefits, not keeping the plant open, should be the goal. Union Rep Juan Castillo spent 12 years on the assembly line.
Well, in my opinion, the plant's shutting down, and we're more concerned about our medical benefits. We're concerned about whatever monetary aid that we're going to get after we get out of here.
Some members fear Toyota's recent troubles and drop in sales could affect negotiations over benefits. The leadership doesn't buy that. Their concern is workers without jobs. Adding to the job losses will be layoffs, perhaps as many as 40,000 at San Francisco Bay Area companies that do supply parts to NUMMI and will lose much of their business. The impending closure has been portrayed in the press as a huge blow to the local community. But Bob Wasserman, the mayor of Fremont, who drove us around his town of 220,000, paints a brighter picture. And he insists Fremont, with a median family income of $93,000 and on the edge of Silicon Valley, won't suffer the way Detroit has.
In Detroit, the auto plants were the center of the activity. That was never the case in Fremont. Most of the people lived outside of Fremont, and they came to work and then went home.
Still, union negotiator Javier Contreras says the job loss shouldn't be dismissed so cavalierly.
It may not be Detroit, but at the same time, the jobs that we work are good-paying jobs with good benefits. It helps the economy.
The mayor points to a new solar manufacturing plant as the kind of thing that could take up the slack in the local economy.
This is a company that will employ 3,000 people, and we're hoping, if we can do it, to try to put together some arrangement where employees from NUMMI can be retrained into some of the jobs that they'll have here.
The town may not suffer, but the workers probably will. Whether NUMMI's blue-collar assembly line employees can find work in green industry is unclear. Local officials, trying to be optimistic, see NUMMI's closing as a chance to bring new, cleaner industry to the area. Professor Cole sees it as the end of California's large-scale auto industry, but also as a limited experiment that paid off for American business.
When Toyota learned to operate their system in the U.S., to treat workers with some respect, that recognized that they had brains and not just physical skills, it got a lot of American companies to sort of rethink what is the contribution of workers to quality, to productivity.
Fremont and NUMMI are trying to figure out what to do with the huge site that the plant occupies. And Toyota has more on its plate right now than reconsidering a firm decision to close this plant at the end of next month.
Well, Tom Avanti, Spencer mentioned this whole business of keeping that plant open, but there didn't seem to be much certainty about that in the voice of
No, it would be a long shot.
about
The
it.
UAW has not given up, and there's a delegation of Californians who are not giving up. I think the unfortunate odds are that it will close on schedule, but then the question is, can it come back again? And in fact, in the Sunday Chronicle business section, I put together a story, which I hope you'll take a look at, about how it came back in '82. This plant was built in '63. It was shut in '82, and it came back again. So it's risen once from the grave. The question now is, could it rise again? And if so, in what reincarnation? That's.
Of course, the finances of GM are quite a bit different now than they were then, and Toyota has its difficulties right now. So if the site winds up being open for redevelopment, is there any other good option right now? It's really, I mean, it's a massive piece of land. It's a gigantic building.
Yeah, it's 5 million square feet. It's 380 acres of a parcel. The best immediate transition, the easiest transition, would be another car company. Is there a Hyundai or a Tata, an Indian company that makes small cars in its own nation? Does it want to do a beachhead just as Toyota wanted to do 25 years ago? Does Hyundai, which is a massive company in South Korea, does it want to do a beachhead? It's not impossible to imagine it coming back. The question would be, would the NUMMI leadership, a separate corporation, sort of how jointly having its strings pulled by the former GM and by Toyota, would it cooperate with having a competitor open up that factory? Good question, isn't it?
Wouldn't it, Tom, take a long time for that to happen too? And in that process, you're talking about massive job losses, you're talking the impact on the suppliers. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the suppliers are a particular problem here. There's about 4,700 people, maybe 5,000 people in the factory itself. But one of the things that Toyota taught about building cars was that you could push out a lot of the manufacturing to suppliers who are in the local area. So you have about 24 local firms that are closely tied to Toyota. They make plastic parts, they make metal parts, they make glass, just in time for delivery to Toyota. Those plants are endangered, and there's an effort underway in Alameda County to try and find other markets for these alternative manufacturers as the plant closes down. Who else needs precision plastic? Who else needs precision metal? The problem is that nobody makes as many of anything as NUMMI did. NUMMI made 240,000 cars and trucks last year in its bad year, and it's made almost 500,000 in its good years. You just don't get industrial products manufactured on that scale.
But nobody's really, people don't seem to have given up of finding some solution that could help out here.
Well, I certainly hope not, because I don't think we want to give up on the concept of blue-collar jobs in the Bay Area. And this was an efficient factory. It was not closed through its inefficiency.
Okay. For ongoing coverage of NUMMI and the future of manufacturing jobs in California, visit our new blog, Shifting Gears. It's at kqed.org/Shifting Gears. And that's just what we're going to do. We're going to shift over to energy now, and seemingly a miracle announcement this week. Rebecca Smith, we had the announcement from Bloom, one of the biggest public relation coups that I've seen in a very long time. Now, have they discovered a source of energy that could change our lives?
Well, what they claim is that they've come up with something called a fuel cell, which in this case would take natural gas or some other fuel, and through an electrochemical process turn it into electricity. They showed off a box that is about the size of a big air conditioner or a huge freezer or something like that. They said it would put out 100 kilowatts of power. the technology they showed looks like something that might be considered first generation, and we have national labs working on third generation fuel cells now. So that looked a little odd. The numbers they put out, I've gone through them backwards and forwards, and I don't get any of the numbers to work out to give me the prices that they said. They said that these would produce power at or less than the cost of power coming off the grid. They said 9 to 10 cents. As best I can work the numbers, they come out to more than $1 a kilowatt hour. So it's a little unclear to me. They said there were subsidies. But there's something, I mean, this is one of these stories, you know, we're talking about NUMMI. Everybody wants to believe that Silicon Valley is going to be the cradle for the next generation of green technology that's going to come in and save old industry and provide jobs for California and provide health care for the workers and solve all these things. The problem is that a lot of these technologies are not really, they're not commercially ready yet. This was a huge PR push. I was amazed at it. And it's got a lot of people in national labs and other places scratching their heads saying, we don't really get this thing.
Debuted on 60 Minutes. It has had the governor. It had
debuted on 60 Minutes.
Yeah, and they had Colin Powell there. They had Dianne Feinstein. They had all kinds of people involved in helping them get the attention of the world. John, you got something there?
No, Belva, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was amazed at the PR push of this with the governor and Colin Powell and all of, and what I find fascinating is that as you're saying, it's hard to kind of make this. I mean, I don't know. Is this wishful thinking? Is there something that the government can do? You were talking about subsidies. Does that mean government subsidies?
Well, one thing that's interesting is they say they're only going to sell these initially in California. Well, California has some of the most generous subsidies for renewable power right now. So they're banking on some kind of set of federal and state subsidies, maybe other things I don't know about. There's a lot we don't know. It is, you know, I'm not doubting that their boxes produce electricity, but they haven't gone through this in the conventional channels. Normally what you do with something like this is you give it to Underwriter Laboratory, you give it to the Electric Power Research Institute. There's certain labs and places you go with your technology and you say, okay guys, kick the tires, see what you think. And none of that happened in this case.
Quickly, what about, how would this impact solar if what they say is true?
The prices they're quoting right now, as far as I can tell, should be, without subsidies, higher than what you would pay for solar, wind, a gas-fired power plant, coal, or nuclear. I don't see anything that looks as expensive to me. So solar prices are steadily dropping.
Could they also benefit from the same sort of economy of scale or improvement of technology and bring their, you know, if they sell a few that turn out to be not so great, the second generation and the third generation better?
That's the story of Silicon Valley, yes.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. In fact, my thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Now some other news from the week. The state is supposed to keep account of people with HIV, but the Legislative Analyst's Office found that 70,000 people were missed. That's important because the cases on record determine how much federal money the state will get for HIV services. So what's to blame? An outdated system that relies on manually managing data instead of keeping the count electronically. Thousands of people are on general assistance in Alameda County, and they are in danger of losing their benefits at the end of next month because the county is faced with declining revenues. To save money, benefits would be cut from 12 months to 3 months for those deemed employable. A large crowd attended a county supervisor's meeting appealing for an extension of the public aid. California's planned high-speed rail system could cause a 6.1% drop in operations at the 3 Bay Area airports, according to a study contracted by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. The easier transit and cheaper train fares could lure away about 6 million airline passengers each year. The San Jose airport would likely be hit the hardest, with a projected 12% loss by 2035. And I'll be back in a moment with Jack Scott, Chancellor of California Community Colleges. Also coming up.
This rehearsal is really focusing on, you know, that walk down Fillmore Street and the textures and the flavors and the people that you encounter.
So let's talk about some of the food that you brought, because this is your sweet Yes, yes. All of these have particular symbolic wishes for health and fortune and happiness and abundance. And some of my favorites are the candied ginger.
And ginger right there.
Right, and then there's all kinds of
yeah.
seeds. And then we have some lotus root there too.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, demand for education is up, but enrollment is down in California's community colleges, the largest system of higher education in the nation, because of state budget cuts. Joining me to discuss the challenges ahead for the colleges and their students from Sacramento, Chancellor Jack Scott. Welcome, Chancellor.
It's great to be on your program.
I said that enrollment is down, but unemployment is at record highs. Isn't that unusual when enrollment numbers usually climb when the job market is bad?
Well, we would be climbing, except we just can't offer the classes that we would like to offer. You know, we had last year 2.89 million students, and as you pointed out, it's the largest system of higher education in the entire nation. But what happened was the state budget cut us by 8%. And so colleges throughout California had to cut back their course sections. And as they cut back their course section, of course, there were many students that were turned away. We admitted them, but they couldn't find classes. Even with a slight decline in enrollment we're experiencing this year, and as I said, it's because we can't offer all the classes we'd like to offer, we're still educating about 200,000 students for which the state gives us no remuneration at all. So it's quite a problem that we're wrestling with, and we think it's bad for the state of California. And of course, it's tragic for those students who come and want to take that freshman English course or a chemistry course, or perhaps they're an unemployed person who comes to us for one of our wonderful career technical programs like nursing or radiological technology or firefighting. So that's the problem we're facing. And when we looked at the way that our enrollment was going, I just felt it was necessary to let the state know what's happening in our community colleges.
Chancellor, I was looking at this list of all the community colleges, the ones that your funded head count and your unfunded head count, and some colleges are really doing a terrific job of taking on students that they're not getting money for. How can they do that?
Well, they won't be able to do it long. In some cases, they're dipping into the reserves, and they decided to just buck up and try to do it as best they can. But you can't do that without eventually bankrupting a college. And so what most of them have done, they've simply pared away courses. As I said, I think the course sections now are about 5% or maybe even more, in some cases below what they offered the previous year. And they did that with a lot of pain. They tried to prioritize what they thought were the most important classes. But nobody likes to turn away students. I know down at Foothill De Anza in the Bay Area, they had a waiting list of over 2,000 students that they couldn't service. So that's rather typical throughout the state.
Well, we were just talking about the NUMMI plant and all those workers that may be out in the job market and looking to retrain. And I noticed that, there are colleges within the area of that NUMMI plant. Is there any special program or any special help that the colleges can get in that district to help some of these people?
Well, what we do is simply look at each college, and there's an enrollment cap placed on the college. Now, that enrollment cap went down slightly because, as I said, we took an 8% cut. And so when a college exceeds its enrollment cap, it just simply doesn't get paid. And so we're really trying our very best to serve the people. And I think it's a tragedy for the state of California because all the studies that I read about tell me that, say, by 2025, we're going to be short about 1 million people who should have a bachelor's degree. The job requires it, but we won't have, our colleges and universities won't be able to turn out that many people.
Any hope for help from somewhere?
Well, we're getting a little help from the federal government. As you know, the Obama administration mentions frequently the community colleges, but frankly not. They can't step up for what and meet the needs that the state. If you're talking about, say, 200,000 students that we're right now educating that we're not getting paid for, and perhaps that many more being turned away, and there's no way for us to know that count because sometimes those students come to our campus.
From beginning to end, this has been a program about a lack of money. So we thank you so much for pointing this out to us and for joining us tonight, Chancellor Scott.
Well, it's been great being here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell the story of the wonderful California community colleges and the challenges that they're facing today.
Thank you. Well, during this Black History Month, two Bay Area performers, choreographer Jacinta Velez and musician Howard Wiley, are working on a new production called the Fillmore Project. It's a tribute to the vibrant cultural heritage of the San Francisco neighborhood that came to be known as the Harlem of the West.
David Johnson is a photojournalist that took a lot of photos during the heyday, but also later after the urban redevelopment. So this is all his photo stream. There's a photo with a man on the corner, and his posture is such that there's a power to it, there's a flavor, there's a swagger to it. The dancers are going to have a responsibility to carry out that flavor as well.
At the ODC Dance Commons in San Francisco, the Fillmore Project is in its early stages. The work, which will be part of the Fillmore Jazz Festival this July, will chronicle the evolution of the Fillmore District from the jazz heyday of the 1940s to the present.
This rehearsal is really focusing on, that walk down Fillmore Street. So again, this whole thing is less physicality, more mannerisms, more characters. Feel the weight in what they're doing, what it feels like in the room.
Jacinta Velez is the artistic director of the newly formed Afro-modern dance company, Liberation Dance Theater. Her first major production, Animal Farm, based on George Orwell's allegorical novel, was a popular and critical success. She is collaborating with Howard Wiley, a well-known jazz saxophonist and artist-in-residence at Intersection for the Arts. His family's ties to the Fillmore drew him to the project.
And the reason why I play saxophone is my grandfather was a saxophonist, and he started playing in the Fillmore. He got this big name around town. He had a short stint with the Count Basie Band and Jimbo's Bob City and whatnot, so I have a very deep connection to the Fillmore.
The Fillmore is famous for the jazz musicians who performed there in the 40s and 50s, greats like Eartha Kitt and Charlie Parker. It was also known for its thriving African-American community and abundance of Black-owned businesses.
You had the spirituality, you had these cats on the corner with that swagger, with that pride. It's that intangible something. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you know where it is. When you see the energy, you just see the people, the looks on their faces. And that's what causes the question, like, what happened?
In the early 60s, the neighborhood entered a period of economic decline, and city officials decided to demolish most of the housing in the name of urban redevelopment. Thousands of residents were displaced, and the vast majority never returned.
My grandfather and my mentor, Bill Stewart, told me how sorry they feel for me that I won't be able to feel what it was like to walk down like Fillmore Street, to feel a sense of community, of sprawling Black businesses, just a sense of being and a sense of purpose that is no longer there. It's like the soul of the city is gone.
You know, when it comes to the Fillmore, I mean, this is where I was raised. I've been here since I was 5 years old.
A musician and concert promoter, Bobby Webb remembers the Fillmore at its height and learned how to play the saxophone in its nightclubs. He's among the residents Howard and Jacinta are interviewing to learn more about Fillmore history.
I was here when it was whole, and I was here when they tore it out, and I'm here while they are trying to put it back. We lost a lot of businesses, we lost a lot of everything, and things have really changed here in the Western Addition. Before, we didn't even have to cross Fillmore Street to get whatever we wanted. We had doctors, we had stores, shoe stores, clothing stores, meat markets. We had everything was right here on Fillmore.
Do you feel that the community has been pushed out because of redevelopment?
Well, when you have to get up and move, that breaks a whole lot of families. And they ripped out whole areas and just tore out, I mean, these people had to go somewhere.
So here's the substation building, and so tonight in our community discussion, we're going to be talking about the status of the building.
The historic Muni substation building was constructed in 1902 as a powerhouse for electric streetcars. It has stood empty on the corner of Fillmore and Turk for more than 30 years. Howard and Hasintha are attending this meeting to learn about the community's ongoing bid to reclaim the building for their use. They'll incorporate the developing story into their production.
Definitely one solution is the city just needs to partner with the community to raise this money for the restoration or the reuse of this building.
The city of San Francisco is currently trying to find a qualified developer to restore and reuse the property. Brothers for Change, a local activist group, wants the property to be turned into an arts and culture center.
And I just want the kids to have exposure, you know, to tap, to ballet, to hip hop, to all sorts of arts.
Let's get it done, and let's get it done the right way.
This project is about preservation. It's about honoring a legacy. We're still just scratching the surface. I mean, this issue and this project represents something that's so huge. It represents American urban life. It represents the rise and fall of many communities throughout the nation, not just the Fillmore.
Hopefully, with the project, we will have an accurate interpretation of what has happened and give people reason to question and to find out what can we do to reclaim our neighborhood.
Nice.
The Fillmore. Well, we're in the final days of the Chinese New Year. Here is Leslie Shabako with a taste of the culinary traditions of the celebration on Food and Wine this week.
The Spring Festival marking the Lunar New Year has been celebrated for more than 4,000 years. The Chinese New Year festivities began on February 14th and culminate on Saturday the 27th with a spectacular parade in San Francisco. This week, T. Tran and Stephanie Im, two bloggers from KQED's Bay Area Bites, join me to reflect on some old and some new traditions and tell us how living in Northern California influences how they celebrate. Traditional celebrations of the Lunar New Year include lion dances and red envelopes. Local restaurants become gathering places for multi-generational banquets. Special foods, sharing, and unique dishes mark the occasion. In markets, ingredients are chosen carefully. Flowers, oranges, tangerines, and kumquat trees, painted signs and lanterns, all leading to the last day when the dragon snakes its way through San Francisco to welcome the Year of the Tiger. Now, Stephanie, it's been a couple of years since you've moved from the East Coast here to San Francisco. How have your traditions of the way you celebrate Chinese New Year changed?
Well, you know, for me, Chinese New Year is always about really family and togetherness and really spending time with the people that you love. It's also very much about the food. It's always about the food. So,
well, of course, that's why we have so much here on the table.
Of food. Right. And the foods are really special because they have certain symbolic meanings, and so they're supposed to bring good luck into your home for the new year. So I've taken some of these traditions, like, for example, my mom used to tell me this story about how she would sit at home for New Year's Eve with her sisters and her mom, and they would make dumplings growing up, and they would have a little assembly line line, and one sister would roll out the dough, the other one would stuff them, and the other one would roll them really, really round.
It reminds me of my Italian family with raviolis.
Exactly. They put everyone to work. So. So I put everyone to work too in my house. So I have all my friends come over, and we make dumplings as well. We make savory dumplings. So that's been a way for me to really bring my friends into my family here in San Francisco and share that experience with them.
And do you have any new dishes that you make? Anything that because it's about color and it's about
color, and red is a very auspicious color in general in Chinese culture. So there is one dish that my friends really loved last year. I made these orange sliced Jello shots, and those were a hit. So
I have to get the recipe from you.
Yeah, I'll send them over to you.
And what about UT? The same feeling. I mean, it's about celebrating your ancestors and your family.
Absolutely about family, and those same images of my mother and my aunts cooking together, making foods. And when I was growing up, my mother would teach me how to make the rice cakes. I'm from Vietnam, and so we celebrate Lunar New Year, and we call it Tet. And so this is from southern Vietnam, and it's sticky rice cakes, which you see in lots of different forms throughout
And
Asia.
what's inside that sticky rice cake?
This version has mung beans, which is the yellow filling, and then lots of nice fatty pork.
Oh, right. And what's the difference between, let's say, Vietnam and northern China and southern China in terms of the cuisine for celebrating New Year's?
Right. Although we're celebrating very similar holidays, there are lots of regional variations. And in northern China, they're the dumplings, which I think, Stephanie, we're referring to the savory wheat dumplings. And in the south, there's a vegetarian dish called jai, because you don't want to start the new year taking a life. And so there's this,
it has lots of vegetables.
Right, it has lots of auspicious ingredients. And then in Vietnam, we have the rice cakes. And in southern China, you also have a version of a sticky rice cake, but without the fillings.
But this is Vietnamese.
Yes.
And let's talk about the food on the table, because you do mention things are auspicious, have a meaning, represent something, and that's true throughout the new year. You know, each day represents something different as well.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some of the food that you brought, because this is your sweet platter?
Yes. So I married in a Cantonese family, and this is something when the holiday families go and visit each other, and friends come, and it's a season of just lots and lots of food, and especially sweets. And all of these have particular symbolic wishes for health and fortune and happiness and abundance. And some of my favorites are the candied ginger.
And ginger right there.
Right, and then there's all kinds of seeds. And then we have some lotus root there too.
Oh, that's wonderful. And what about, Stephanie, what about the tangerines? Because the tangerines have the stem on them and the leaves.
Exactly. So with the stems and the leaves, it symbolizes strong relationships and strong bonds throughout the year. And the color of them, resembles gold, and so they're supposed to bring in a lot of wealth and good fortune, for the coming year.
And what about you see lots of flowers, especially
those
red
gladiolas, exactly. So of course red is that lucky color again, and gladiolas in particular are really good luck, because you'll see the blossoms actually bloom in levels going up, and so they resemble the steps to success essentially.
And you need to, when you go to visit somebody's home, do you bring a living plant? Is that the goal? You bring something?
Yes, there's always something living and blooming, and to bring freshness and life and into the home and into the business. So.
Right. And what about red? My question to you is the color red.
Oh, right. People think of red as a lucky color, and it is in certain weddings, and you'll see that. But in the old days, there's this thought that demons would come around this time, and this particular demon was afraid of blood. And
so
loud,
I thought it might have something to do with
and loud noises, which is why we have all these fireworks. So to keep the demon away, you put red everywhere.
Right.
And now it just means good luck.
And now it means good luck. Well, it is the year of the tiger, hence my tiger here.
Yes.
So what can people do in San Francisco to celebrate and join in the fun?
It's been wonderful living in San Francisco because it's come from not only a family celebration, but the whole city celebrates. And so you can go down and see the parade in Chinatown, and there's a street festival and lots of great food.
And I thought it was interesting that really parades are not as common in Asia, for example. It's something that really started here in San Francisco.
That's a really good point. It's sojourners here in the late 1800s who were working on the farms, and they were homesick, and so they had a special silk dragon made in China and brought here, and then they got together and celebrated, and just really took off, became very popular, and now we're known for this beautiful dragon parade.
And it's certainly, if not the largest, one of the largest outside of China. I think it's the largest. Are you planning on going?
Yes, as soon as we're done with the dumplings, we're going to the parade.
That's
we'll
fantastic. That's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you both for being with me. If you'd like to attend the Chinese New Year Parade, it's in San Francisco on Saturday, February 27th from 5:15 p.m. to 8 p.m. It begins on Market and 2nd Streets and travels to Kearny and Jackson. And I have to say, it's really fun, so bring the whole family. Thank you both for joining me. You can find recipes and a lot more from Stephanie Im and T-Tran at kqed.org/Bay Area Bites, or watch Check Please Bay Area at kqed.org/Check Please. So Happy New Year, or Gung Hei Fat Choi, right?
Gung Hei Fat Choi.
I said that right, huh?
And that's it for tonight. The hour passed quickly. Please visit our website, kqed.org/thisweek, to watch complete episodes as well as segments from our archives. You can subscribe to our newsletter and podcast and share your thoughts about our stories. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.
Major funding for Spark on This Week in Northern California is provided by Diane B. Wilsey. Additional funding provided by the George Frederick Jewett Foundation, Helen Sarah Steyer, and Fred Levin and Nancy Livingston of the Shenson Fund.